Imagine that, after a lifetime of pain and separation, your own family, those you once loved, just leave you behind, without warning. And after years of silence, they come back. But not to ask for forgiveness, but to ask for help. Does it seem impossible? Then you need to hear Olivia Reed's story. Today, we're going to delve into the story of a woman who was left behind by her own family. Her parents, with whom she had been very close, disowned her without any explanation. But what happens when years later they reappear, weakened and with a desperate plea for help? How do you deal with the pain of betrayal, with the wounds of a past that refuses to be forgotten? And is reconciliation really possible when the secrets of a lifetime begin to be revealed? If you've ever been disappointed by those you loved, or if you're simply looking for a story of overcoming and faith, then you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories like this, which will touch your soul and change the way you see life. Now, let's understand together what Olivia went through and find out if she could finally find the peace, redemption, and forgiveness she had been searching for. That house looked perfect from the outside. White facade, well-tended flowers on the porch, the smell of baking cookies that escaped through the windows on Sundays. Anyone who saw it from the outside would never imagine the silence that cut through the air between those walls. Olivia grew up there, but never really felt like she belonged. Her parents, Thomas and Margaret, were the kind of people who valued their reputation more than anything else. And, within that bubble of appearances, love became an unnecessary detail. As a child, Olivia tried at all costs to get her father's attention with drawings, impeccable reports, small gestures. But Thomas rarely looked away from the newspaper. Margaret, on the other hand, hugged her coldly and said things like, "Daughter, behave yourself. Don't embarrass us." Over time, Olivia stopped trying. She silenced her dreams and learned to smile when her heart screamed. After all, in that house, being invisible seemed safer than being real. The years passed, but the feeling of being under judgment never went away. At every dinner, there was a veiled demand about her posture, her choices, even about the way Olivia breathed. She felt like she lived inside a showcase, as if her very existence were a poorly fitted piece in the Grand Reed family theater. The hardest part was knowing that even if she did her best, it was never enough. Every time she tried to open up, to show her pain, her parents responded with polite indifference, like someone closing the curtain before the show ended. This gradually undermined Olivia's self-esteem. She began to doubt her own emotions, her own feelings, until she convinced herself that maybe the problem was her. Maybe she really was too dramatic, as Margaret would say whenever she cried. Still, there was a hope burning deep inside, the hope that one day her parents would look at her with pride, with tenderness, that they would finally see who she really was. Olivia graduated, started working early, paid for her own college, and even without receiving support, she always sent Christmas cards and flowers on her parents' wedding anniversary. She never stopped trying to build a bridge, even knowing that on the other side there was only cold concrete. She believed that time would heal, that time would show her worth, but she didn't imagine that, in fact, time would only reveal a truth harsher than any silence. She was never part of that world, and the warning would come in the coldest and cruelest way possible, in an envelope. The morning that envelope arrived, Olivia was drinking coffee alone in her small apartment. The cup was still warm, the radio playing an old song that reminded her of her childhood. When she saw the name Thomas and Margaret Reed on the address, her heart raced. For a second, she thought it might be an invitation, an attempt at reconciliation. With trembling hands, she tore open the seal and read. Each line was a cut. Cold, direct, blunt. Her parents had made their decision to remove her from the will official. No explanations, no conversation, no chance to defend herself. Olivia was disinherited, as if she had never existed. The ground disappeared. She stood there, still, with the paper in her hands, as if she were holding the shards of what she had once believed to be love. And the worst was yet to come. Olivia faced that paper as if she were facing a sentence. But it wasn't the money. That hurt. It wasn't the inheritance, nor the family's property. What tore her apart inside was what it represented. a definitive cut. A message carved in impersonal letters saying, in so many words, that she no longer belonged to that nucleus, that her blood, her history, her sacrifices meant nothing. Why would they do this? What had she done to deserve such contempt? In her mind, the question echoed without an answer, like a scream into the void. She felt a mixture of anger, pain, and a deep sadness, the kind that tightens your chest and steals your breath, even when everything around you seems calm. In the days that followed, Olivia tried to be rational. She wanted to believe that there had been some misunderstanding, that perhaps her parents were under someone's influence, or that it was some legal error. But deep down, she knew it was intentional. Thomas and Margaret had always been cold, but this was cruel. She reread the document dozens of times, looking for a loophole, a justification, any trace of humanity in the words. Nothing. Just legal formalities and cold signatures, as if they were getting rid of an old piece of furniture in the house. And the worst part? No phone calls. No letters of support. No requests for explanations. The silence was absolute. A silence that screamed, and that made her feel like an orphan, even though her parents were still alive. The memories started to come back stronger. The Christmases when she would prepare desserts to please her mother, even though she was ignored at the end of the night. The birthdays when she would wait for a hug from her father, who never came. The times when she called to share an achievement, only to hear phrases like, "Oh, that's great. I have to go now." All of this now made sense. They had never really been with her. They had only tolerated her presence. And, by deciding to disown her, they had only confirmed a truth that was painful to accept. Love there had always been conditional. Olivia cried. She cried like she hadn't cried in a long time. But in that cry, something was also beginning to emerge. A new kind of strength. Still confusing, but real. Because when everything falls apart, you either sink or you learn to swim. But this new strength did not come as an immediate cry of overcoming. It came as a restlessness in the chest, as a desire to understand, to rebuild herself. Olivia spent nights awake, writing letters she would never send, pouring her heart out into her pillow, praying silently, asking God to show her a path, a meaning in the midst of such brutal rejection. It was in this emptiness that she began to search for something beyond the pain. The connection with what really mattered. She began to walk inside herself, revisiting wounds, seeing with different eyes who she was, and who she could become without the burden of needing to be accepted by those who rejected her from the beginning. But this process, like all true healing, was still just beginning. And life, with its perfect irony, would soon put a new test before her, a test that would come from those she least expected. Time passed, but the healing process was not complete. Olivia continued her life with the dignity of someone who has learned to walk alone. She moved to another city, opened a small furniture restoration studio, and found in the silence of the old wood a kind of peace that she never had in the house where she grew up. There, among paints, sandpaper, and stories hidden in the cracks of old objects, she began to rebuild herself. Little by little. Alone, yes, but whole. She learned to be self-sufficient, and that, as painful as it was a form of freedom. She no longer had expectations of her parents. She had buried any hope of reconciliation. Or at least, that was what she believed. Everything changed on a cloudy Wednesday morning. Olivia was finishing the restoration of a 1930s dresser when the doorbell rang. She didn't pay much attention at first. She thought it was just another curious customer. But when she looked up, the world stopped. There they were, Thomas and Margaret. The two of them stood at the entrance to the studio, their expressions a mix of shame, wounded pride, and need. Olivia froze. Her heart raced. Her varnish-stained hand trembled over the brush. For a moment, she felt like running away, screaming, asking how they dared. But she remained silent. The same silence she knew so well, only now she was the one controlling time. Thomas was the first to try to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Margaret held a bag like a shield. They both looked smaller, older, and more fragile. Her father, once imposing and distant, now looked like a cornered man, broken inside. Olivia noticed that at a glance, but didn't let pity take over. It still hurt too much. And so she waited for them to take the initiative. Margaret cleared her throat nervously and then, with a shaky voice, said, "We need to talk to you." That was it. As if all the years of distance, silence, and rejection could fit into such a short sentence. Olivia took a deep breath, and she answered with the calm of someone who had cried all she had to cry. "Now you need to, don't you?" That sentence cut through the air. The parents exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. They hadn't expected a warm welcome, but perhaps they also weren't prepared to find a firm, confident Olivia who no longer saw them as unattainable figures. They were there for a reason. It wasn't affection, it wasn't longing. It was need. It was clear in the way they looked away, in the weight of their hesitation. Olivia felt it. And she also felt that this was a turning point. Because when abandonment comes knocking on your door, it tests how much you've healed and how much you still bleed. But she didn't know what they wanted yet. And the words that came next would change everything again, forever. The silence between the three of them was almost unbearable. Olivia, her hands still stained with paint and her heart heavy, stared at her parents as if they were strangers. They were there, in front of her, not as the loving parents she had once dreamed of, but as two individuals who needed her, and that was in a way even more painful. When Thomas finally spoke, his voice was low, full of a humiliation that Olivia could not hide. "Olivia, we need you." These words, simple and direct, made no sense at all, as if the girl they had suddenly disowned was the only answer to their problems. Her father continued, "Margaret is sick. The doctor said she doesn't have much time. And there's nothing more we can do. You have the knowledge, Olivia. We know you've always been intelligent, that you're capable of understanding what we can't. We need your help." It was as if the ground had opened up beneath her feet. Olivia looked at her mother, who was pale and haggard, holding the weight of visible pain on her face. But it wasn't just Margaret's illness that was at stake. The truth that Thomas was trying to hide, with his words disguised as regret, was that pride had finally defeated them. They were broken, financially, emotionally, spiritually, and suddenly, the daughter they had scorned was their only chance to salvage what was left of their lives. To Olivia, this was the height of irony. The same mother who had so harshly dismissed her now seemed to be asking for help. And her father, who had never looked at her with true compassion, was there, begging her. Olivia's heart filled with a whirlwind of emotions. She felt anger, yes. She felt indignation at having been discarded as if she were a burden. But there was something else, an immense sadness, and for some reason she herself didn't understand, a desire to help. What made her stop and think was Margaret's look. Something about him felt fragile, almost like a last-ditch attempt to reach what she had ignored all her life, a genuine connection. Deep down, Olivia knew that her mother, despite everything, was not trying to manipulate her. She was simply lost. And the pain of seeing that weakened woman, with her eyes filled with regret, awakened a silent question in Olivia's heart. Is there forgiveness for those who destroyed us? The tension in the air was palpable. The words that were about to come out of her mouth could decide what would happen next. Olivia knew she couldn't simply ignore the request, but she also couldn't allow her heart to be deceived once again. The weight of the decision was great. If she agreed to help, she would be reunited with those who had betrayed her. But if she refused, her own soul would be even heavier, carrying the regret of not having done what she could to help. She took a deep breath, the dilemma surfacing stronger with each passing second. It wouldn't be easy, but the decision had to be made. But what Olivia didn't know was that this choice would become more difficult than she could have imagined. Olivia spent days in an internal storm. She knew that her decision was far from simple. Forgiveness had never been easy for her, especially when it came to people who had ignored her, betrayed her, and above all, made her suffer. But the humanity she felt in her mother's eyes, the weakness that shone through Thomas, made her think that perhaps it was time to stop fighting against something that could, in some way, heal her too. She felt like a tree that, even though it had been cut down, could still flourish if it were cared for. But when she looked at her parents, she felt like a root that had been torn out, trying to find the soil that would support it. She didn't know if that would be possible. With the decision made, Olivia invited them to her house, but the atmosphere was heavy. The air seemed thicker when she welcomed them. Nothing was clearer to her than the emotional distance that still existed between them, even with the attempt at reconciliation. Thomas and Margaret seemed even more distant, as if their plea for help was an attempt to buy forgiveness without really understanding what that entailed. Their pride blinded them to the true pain they had caused. And though she was determined to help them, Olivia couldn't help but feel a growing bitterness for every word left unsaid, every action left undone. What had been done to her seemed irreparable, but the question that consumed her was, will helping them finally help me find peace? In the days that followed, Olivia tried to focus on what really mattered, her mother's health. She spent hours researching alternative treatments, talking to doctors, and trying to learn everything that could ease Margaret's suffering. The work at the studio, which had once filled her with so much joy, now seemed like a backdrop to the new emotional chaos. With each phone call, each doctor's appointment, she felt more involved, more committed. But inside, the conflict persisted. There were times when, as she made decisions about her mother's treatment, she wondered if she was somehow subjecting herself to the same cycle of pain. Was she repeating history? Was she helping only to be hurt again? The fear that it would all be in vain tormented her. The truth was that, as much as Olivia tried to open herself to forgiveness, a part of her was not yet ready to embrace those who had emotionally destroyed her. There was a deep fear, a lack of trust that could not be healed with words. She still saw herself as the unloved daughter, a young woman who had to grow up alone because her parents had moved away from her, and she didn't know if she would be able to leave all that behind. For her parents, this help was a reflection of desperation and an attempt to save something that was already lost. But for Olivia, it represented something different, a chance to free her soul. And by helping, she didn't know if she would be overcoming the wound or simply digging a new hole inside herself. The nights were now long and difficult. As she made decisions in favor of Margaret's health, she felt increasingly divided, as if she were rebuilding herself amidst an internal noise that wouldn't leave her alone. The request for help, although sincere, carried with it the weight of all the previous suffering. But what weighed most heavily was the feeling that, by accepting to help them, she could be opening herself up to something even more painful. Because no matter how much she tried to deny it, the truth was there, right in front of her. The relationship with her parents would never be the same. And perhaps forgiveness was not a straight line, but a winding and uncertain path, with more stones than she thought she could handle. Time passed, and Olivia continued to immerse herself in helping her parents. She took them to appointments, sought out alternative treatments, and even with the weight of each step, the feeling that she was doing something important for Margaret grew stronger. But deep down, she couldn't help but wonder, is this really forgiveness? Or is it just an attempt to fix what is beyond repair? As she delved deeper into the journey to help her mother, the wounds from her childhood returned, like ghosts that refused to be buried. Margaret's face, weakened by illness, brought back a memory that Olivia could never erase: the coldness with which her mother rejected her, the heavy silence that separated them for so many years. How could she forgive someone who had destroyed her so deeply? But as Olivia was forced to confront her pain, the journey transformed her in subtle ways. Forgiveness, she realized, was not something she had to do out of obligation, but something that came from within. It was a choice, a conscious decision to break with the past. It didn't mean the scars would disappear, but it did mean that her ability to live, to move forward, would be greater than the pain that had consumed her for so long. But the line between giving that forgiveness and losing herself in a cycle of pain was a fine one. And with each act of love she showed, a part of Olivia wondered if she was giving too much of herself, if she was opening up a space that should have been kept closed. She didn't know, but something inside her told her that forgiveness wouldn't be given just out of compassion for others, it was out of love for herself. It was funny, Olivia thought, how life kept putting her through the same situations to teach her new lessons. When she helped her mother up, tucked her into bed, and soothed her when the pain took hold, she was no longer the daughter who expected to be loved. No, she no longer needed that validation. What she felt was a kind of genuine compassion, one that somehow she didn't know still existed in her heart. The anger, the revolt, all of it was still there, of course, but she was learning to put those emotions in their proper place. Olivia no longer needed to be acknowledged. She was beginning to discover that forgiveness, more than for others, was a key to her own inner peace. That night, as she was getting ready for bed, she thought about how much her life had changed since her parents had come to her. She looked up at the ceiling, and for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. Not because things were easy, but because she knew that in some way she was rebuilding herself. And when Margaret fell asleep on the couch, with a peaceful expression that was no longer that of an unbeatable woman, but of someone who now saw herself as vulnerable, Olivia knew that her act of compassion was, in fact, a reflection of her own transformation. Deep down, she wasn't just helping her parents. She was, in some way, helping herself find healing. But as Olivia began to let go of the ghosts of her past, there was still something she didn't know. Something Thomas and Margaret hadn't told her. Something that would completely change everything she believed about what was happening. Something that was about to shatter the sense of hope and transformation she had begun to build. And as she closed her eyes, uneasiness crept into her mind. Could there be more to this reconciliation that they're not saying? The truth always finds a way to reveal itself, and for Olivia, the truth was about to become a double-edged sword. In the following days, as she was sorting through her mother's medical records, something caught her eye. Among old papers and treatment records, there was a letter, hidden deep in a file folder. Olivia knew she shouldn't, but something inside her urged her to open it. As she unfolded the paper, she found a message she hadn't expected. Thomas, we know what happened to Olivia. We can't run from it anymore. The decision has been made. The words didn't make sense at first glance. But what was there on that forgotten piece of paper caused her heart to turn over. Why had she never known this? Why was the truth about what really happened between her parents and her being kept a secret? Olivia, who until then believed that the relationship with her parents was being rebuilt, now felt the weight of a lie that had been going on for years. The letter was not only a revelation about the present, but about the entire past that she had never known. Those seemingly innocent words began to unravel a story of manipulation and guilt that left her feeling groundless. What she had read there did not fit with the narrative that her parents had given about what happened to the family. Pain washed over her immediately. She felt betrayed again, as if she had been deceived by the people she loved most. Anger rose like a wave in her chest, and she didn't know whether to cry, scream, or simply run away. What hurt her the most was not the fact that her parents had walked away from her, but the feeling that they had deliberately hidden the truth, not just from Olivia, but from everyone around her. And now, here they were, in front of her, asking for help as if nothing had happened. As if the pain she carried inside her wasn't the reflection of a lie that would never have been discovered if it weren't for that piece of paper. She walked into the living room where Thomas and Margaret were sitting as if everything was fine. The tension in the air seemed thicker than ever. Olivia, her heart sinking, looked at her parents. They knew she had found the letter, but no one said anything. The silence between them was deafening. Thomas was the first to break it. "Olivia, you shouldn't have seen this." His words sounded like a sentence. He was desperately trying to protect the secret that was now exposed. Margaret, on the other hand, was motionless. Her eyes, once full of regret, were now empty. It was as if guilt had finally taken over her. What Olivia felt at that moment was not just anger. It was a mixture of disappointment and sadness. Something deep inside that made her question everything she believed about her family. She looked at her parents and with a trembling voice asked, "What did you do? Why did you hide this from me?" Thomas's gaze drifted to the floor, and his mother, silent, just sighed, as if she expected Olivia to forgive everything that was behind that lie. But what hurt her the most, besides the lie, was the fact that they had done all that while she was living her own life, trying to find a way to overcome the pain. And now, the truth was there, thrown in her face like an affront. There was no more trust. There was no more room for illusion. The reconstruction she had begun was being destroyed, piece by piece, before her eyes. But a part of Olivia, still, with some hope, tried to understand why. What had happened that was so serious? What had led them to make this decision? The silence continued, and Olivia once again found herself alone. But this time, anger was not enough to heal the emptiness she felt. She knew she would have to make a difficult decision, perhaps the most difficult of her life. How to move forward after this revelation. There was something more behind this story, and Olivia knew that the search for the truth was only just beginning. Olivia spent the night awake, her mind full of questions and emotions she couldn't sort out. The weight of discovering her parents' secret was overwhelming. How could she continue to offer help to someone who had, in fact, been responsible for such profound pain? But at the same time, she remembered her own journey, the strength she had found within herself to overcome it, how faith and hope had been her greatest allies. She didn't know what the future held for her, but something inside her told her that there was a lesson to be learned, even in the midst of chaos. Forgiveness is not a favor to others, she thought. It's a favor to myself. The next morning, Olivia decided to confront her parents. The house was tensely silent, as if the air around them was thick with unspoken words. She called them into the living room, and Thomas and Margaret's eyes were filled with expectation. They both knew the moment of truth had arrived. But Olivia, instead of accusing them, began with a reflection that, to them, seemed unexpected. I don't know what you were thinking, or why you made these decisions, and I may never fully understand. But what hurts me the most is that, even now, you try to protect me from something that's already been done, something that's part of our history. She paused, taking a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I don't need any more lies, any more omissions. What I need is honesty, a chance to heal not only you, but myself. I want to help my mother, I want to help you, but I can't do that if there's no transparency, if there's no real change. The silence weighed even more heavily. She was determined. The anger that had consumed her before was now a force of clarity, a certainty that she could no longer live in illusions. Thomas was the first to move. He looked at Olivia, his eyes swollen with sadness, and with a hoarse and tired voice, he finally spoke the truth she had been dreading. Olivia, the reason we drifted apart was much more complex than you can imagine. Your mother and I made bad decisions, but it was for you, to protect you from something that at the time we thought was best. We didn't want you to know the truth because it was unbearable. The words didn't come easily to him, but they were finally being said, and what Olivia heard made her feel a whirlwind of emotions that she didn't know how to process. She looked at them, both of them now visibly shaken. Protect? What did you want to protect in me? Because the truth is that your protection only destroyed me. The distance, the unspoken words, the silence between us, all of it drove me away, from you and from myself. I needed you, and now, all that's left is a trail of pain that I still don't know how to erase. But in that moment, Olivia realized something she had never noticed before. Even with all the pain her parents had caused her, she still felt a love for them. A love that, despite its wounds, was still capable of being redeemed. Forgiveness was no longer an obligation. It was not just a choice for them, but for her. Forgiving did not mean forgetting. It did not mean that everything would go back to the way it was before. But somehow she knew that her peace depended on this decision. The tension in the room began to dissipate, and the three of them fell silent, reflecting on what had just happened. The healing process was still far from complete, but at least Olivia felt that she had taken the first step toward true understanding. And when she looked at her mother, she felt something unexpected, a new beginning. Not an instant healing, but the hope that perhaps forgiveness really was the key to all of this. Before leaving the room, Olivia looked at her parents one last time and in a soft but firm voice said, I will help you. But first, we need to start being real, and the truth is that we have a long way to go. Let's start over. Not from where we left off, but from where we are now. And so, Olivia's story teaches us that even in the greatest adversity, true healing begins within. Throughout her journey, she not only faced the pain of her parents' betrayal, but was also able to transform anger into understanding, loss into an opportunity for growth. The decision she made, to choose forgiveness not as a favor to others but as a gift to herself, was perhaps the most difficult, but also the most liberating. Sometimes the healing process does not follow a linear path. It is not simple or quick. But, as Olivia discovered, it is possible to start over, not from where we left off, but from where we are now, with all that we carry inside us. With this, she leaves us with a powerful life lesson. Forgiveness does not erase the past, but frees us for the future. And often, in order to heal, we must first understand the truth, no matter how painful it may be. Now I ask you, what about you? Have you ever been through something similar? Have you ever faced betrayal and pain from the person you loved the most? What would you do in Olivia's place? Would you, like her, be able to choose peace and forgiveness? Or would you walk away forever from the person who hurt you? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Share this message with someone who might need to hear it today, someone who might find strength in Olivia's story, because sometimes a simple gesture of support can be the first step towards a real change in someone's life.